Hi guys, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and continue with What is Art with part 2. So I'm going to share screen with you really quick and go back to our lecture. Okay, so just as a recap, we were trying to talk about what art is to begin with, and we are discovering that maybe it's not as simple, but what the role of the artist is in society, but what we're going to cover in these lectures is all sorts of different types of art terminology. And so we talked about what is art, what is creativity, these 5 DNA traits, very important that you know those for your exam. And then we talked about trained and untrained artists, looked at some of the occupations of artists, and some of the top paying art jobs, and then started to discuss untrained artists. With your folk artist and outsider artist, our example of Romare Bearden, and some vocabulary such as collage, photo montage, and then we looked at a few of those artists in relation to being untrained artists. And then we were introduced to this word visual literacy, the ability to recognize, understand, and communicate the meaning of visual images. And this is where we need to pick up right here with representational versus non-representational. Okay, so your homework is going to be asking you some questions in relation to this particular PowerPoint. So I think what I'm also going to do before we get started is go back to our page and look in modules. I got to move a couple little things around so I can navigate myself. Okay, you're going to see here that your readings in your modules are going to align pretty much with the PowerPoints and the content that you need to know for test. But what is art is right here in form and content, aesthetics, okay, subjective, objective. That is your textbook. So although I am going over these PowerPoints, you're still going to need to go in and read this content as well too, because you're going to have quizzes right here. Okay, you've got a module quiz that's going to be due. And again, don't pay attention to these dates right here because your semester may not align with those dates. Or if you're an 8-week versus a 16-week. But the content is what you need to focus on, okay? So we've opened up this PowerPoint right here. So you already have all the notes to help you study also. So I'm going over these visually just to enhance and reinforce, but everything is here for you. And your homework, let's go ahead and go open it up just so you'll know what it is I'm asking of you in your homework. Okay, so we've already discussed those 5 DNA traits. Okay, now we're going to be talking about what are the 2 representational arts. We're going to discuss the difference between looking and seeing, and then discuss iconography and how iconography can help you. Now, if you remember, if I put this in student view, okay, it's going to be hard to see it right now because the course isn't open yet. See, that's why it says the assignment is locked until. But if you remember from the last video, is that there was a blue button that said submit assignment or start assignment. Sorry, start assignment. And when you click on that, then it's going to give you that drop down menu. Okay. And that is what you need to paste. Okay. The text box. Okay. You need to paste into it. So every assignment that you do, you're going to copy your questions and go paste them down into your text box. So I'm going to do a separate video for that, but again, I just want to remind you that that's going to be required. So it's going to be redundant because you're going to hear it again whenever you see that video. It says how to submit an assignment. Okay, but we want to answer these questions right here as we continue our PowerPoint. Okay, so now let me go back here because this is where we're at to answer question number 2, because you can go through here and you can copy the content and you can paste it into your homework. So let's do that. There we go. So you can download your assignments if you would like. Okay. All right. Okay. It's having a little fit on me. Not a big deal. Okay. So as we continue in representational art, we're talking about art that's known to be objective or figurative art. So any work of art that seeks to resemble the world of natural appearance. Okay. These objects oftentimes in representational art are called subjects. So figurative, like I said, is oftentimes referred to these human-like kind of qualities, but you can still get away with saying, oh, that looks figurative, kind of even if it's abstracted, okay? But subjects also, they can fall into whether they're realistic or if they're abstract. That's what is the object that is meant to be viewed, okay? That it is purposefully set in such a way that it draws attention to itself, and you get that message that that is what the subject is, or the topic of the art itself, whether it be a painting or a sculpture. But there are 2 types of representational art: realism, okay, abstract, okay, are meant to represent something of the natural world. So we need to know these definitions. So like I said, you can go copy and you can paste over there, but you need to know these for your exam. Okay, you need to know this term representational art, and you need to know that under the umbrella of representational are the 2, realism and abstract. Okay, so realism resembles natural world as it truly exists. The object looks illusionistically real. Okay, it's a painting of a bowl of fruit. It looks like a bowl of fruit. Okay, abstract makes reference to the natural object, but is simplified or distorted so that the object appears to kind of depart from natural appearance. But remember, it's still, you can still kind of get the understanding of what it is. For example, an apple may now be a circle, and the leaf on the apple now may look like an almond shape, and it's green and red. And there's no volume. It doesn't look dimensional, okay? But you still read it as an apple in its context, right? So, but it's been simplified into shape and color, all right? So, non-representational art, on the other hand, sometimes can get mixed up with abstract because sometimes they can look quite similar. But non-representational art does not represent anything of the natural world necessarily, okay? It explores the inherent expressive or aesthetic potential of the formal elements and principles. That's different, okay? So let's go see what we mean by that. Let's go look at some representational. Let's go look at some non-representational. Okay, so with our representational art, realism, okay, we look at this painting and we say that it's a pipe and it's a newspaper and it's sitting on a desk and there's some matches and some tobacco's falling out of it, right? This effect is thought to be trompe-l'oeil. Okay, you need to know that for your exam. Trompe-l'oeil is French for fool the eye. Okay, it's a funny word, trompe-l'oeil. Okay, French for fool the eye. Okay, so again, it tricks us into finding the simplest answer of what it is we're looking at. We don't look at this and go, that's a painting of a pipe. No, we look at it and we go, that's a pipe, right? So we have to stop immediately, though, when we're critiquing art, we're looking at art, we have to take a step and say, that's an illusion of a pipe. Because we know we can't pick that up and smoke it. We know it, right? That's just paint laid in such a way that it tricked your brain. Okay, artists, they hone in on skills that make it easy for your brain to buy into what it is that they've created for you. But we always have to remember and identify first off, always, what's the medium? It's a painting. You may not know if it's an oil or an acrylic or a watercolor, but that it is a medium to be identified, right? And then you start to put it in a category. Well, does it look realistic? Or does it make reference to something that can be realistic? Or does it not? Right? So these are the first steps when it comes to visual literacy. You need to be able to identify mediums. I said mediums, but I'll explain that later. Plural for your test is media. Now, here's an example of representational art, abstract. We've got Gustav Klimt, The Kiss. You may have seen this before, but abstract art is art that's based on natural appearances, but depart significantly from them, right? So we can see that it's, yes, figurative. There's that term figurative, but figurative doesn't necessarily mean means realism, because we've got these shapes, that are flattened out, these colors that are pretty bold, not necessarily natural, but not unnatural, right? So this happens to be from Klimt's golden period. So the gold leaf representing the divine, and the embrace itself suggesting a spiritual connection between the two. This is kind of this Art Nouveau style. Okay, but just an example of abstract, I think it's perfect. But here's another painting that could easily be misconstrued as abstract. And some people would actually say, well, it is abstract. No, because if we think about our definition, non-representational art, also known as non-objective art, is art that makes no reference to the natural world and explores the inherent expressive or aesthetic potential of the formal elements and principles, right? So one person can look at this and go, oh yeah, I don't recognize anything of the natural world. It's definitely non-representational art. But yet another person could come in and say, oh no, it looks like a painter's palette off to the left on the bottom, and that's the sun, in the middle to the right some, and that looks like an orange slice on a toothpick, maybe it's an orange instead of the sun, and they're looking at it like it's been abstracted. That's the crazy world of art. The way that we see things are biased. The way that we interpret information is unique. That's why it's a theory, right? It's it's the aesthetics. But oftentimes, again, the artist can give us an idea of what kind of art it is through artist statements, through a body of work, their backgrounds and such. And this happens to be called In Blue by Kandinsky. Now, let's look at these two terms right here, looking and seeing. Oftentimes, we think we understand what looking is. It's when you see something, right? But we never think of it just being mechanical. And that's what it is. It's the function to look at something, right? That's the eye pupil opens up. It's bringing in the light waves that are forming an image, and your brain, then takes that stuff coming in. Seeing is the interpretation of what's coming in. It's the more active extension of looking, but it's where we derive the meaning. Like very quickly, you can have a bird fly in front of your face, or you see something fly in front of your face. You know something flew in front of your face, but you don't know the details. The minute that you can identify, right, and comprehend, and it processes, it's a longer extension of the mechanical. That is when you are seeing it. Okay. So we as audience we can look at something very quickly and get pleasure or displeasure, okay, without really seeing it. So, oh, I don't like that color, or I don't care for that shape, or things like that. You get a response to it pretty quick, right? We're going to try to continue looking so we can see it, so we can interpret it. So let's take a moment and look at Edward Weston. Okay, this is his work called Pepper Number 30. As we become more conscious of our own sensory experiences, we open up new levels of awareness. So many of you guys have eaten a pepper before, right? But I want y'all to notice we can use that word figurative here. It's not human, but yet it takes on this reference. It looks kind of like, living things embracing each other, you know, um, it seems to be nestled or something. So it's got this figurative quality about it. But if you've ever eaten a pepper, you know what it tastes like. If you've ever smelt a pepper, some of you right now in your memory are smelling and tasting. You can already relate to that. Now, not everybody can do that, by the way. It's a genetic thing, I think, that people are able to think of memory and they can smell and they can taste. But it's kind of like you can also hear, from memory as well, too. So Edward Weston has given us this, this strange phenomenon of a photograph, which is of reality. Um, it represents a pepper. It is a pepper. It's in your face, a pepper. But he's abstracted it. He's simplified it. It's not necessarily distorted. It's distorted because that's just the way it was, the way it grew, but it's simplified. So it now becomes like this realistic abstraction, which is almost very strange to see the two things exist, but we would put it into an abstracted imagery of, this pepper. So he's done the same thing here again. If we look at the image on the left, this is a seashell. I'm so sorry. Let me put that on mute. So when we look at that image, we don't recognize it as what those typical nautilus shells are that have the beautiful spiral design. He's given us a different view that's kind of flattened it out. It's got some texture, but there's some shapes here that we see, right? It's flattened out. Now, the fact that it doesn't have color, that's just because color photography has not been invented yet, okay? Color photography doesn't come onto the scene until the 1930s, and it doesn't become popular until much later, like 20, 25 years later. So Weston is using typical black and white anyway, which seems to also simplify it. So it can be difficult for us to really understand the complexity of what it is we're looking at, but nonetheless, we can take the same kinds of joy and pleasure even in the abstracted form. And so when we look at this image on the right, if you take a moment to try to figure out what that is, I've heard people tell me all sorts of things from it's a mop to it's fabric to water, but it's actually a cabbage leaf. A simple cabbage leaf that's positioned in such a way that we're not accustomed to appreciate the folds in the way that it's grown, to appreciate the way that has this linear quality. It seems to come out at us very poetically. It's frozen in time in a way. And Weston provided that for us. So let's talk about form and content. Throughout the semester, I'm going to be asking you, when you critique artwork, to talk about form and content. Form is what we see, and that refers to the total effects of the combined formal qualities, visual qualities within a work, the form of it, okay? And if you've ever had art before, you've probably heard of that word, okay? Form. And then content. Content is the meaning which we get from the form. Okay, it's the meaning behind what we're looking at. And sometimes through the form, it's easy and sometimes it's not. But I'm going to be asking you guys to give me form and content on top of context as well too. But for right now, let's just focus on these two terms. If we look at these two artworks, we've got Rodin and Brancusi. Both of them are titled The Kiss. They're working in marble. They're doing what's called a subtractive process, a reductive process of removing and carving. Okay. But one is representational realism and the other is representational abstract. We know that they're both heterosexual couples. Well, we have the signals that tell us that, right? Including, even though this is abstracted, this is more curvy and has longer hair. So we just assume that it's a heterosexual couple, right? And then if we look at the way that the sizes have changed, this one is, about life size, and this one right here is, about, knee high, right? So big difference in the size. So even though there's some similarities, there's some differences as well. We're talking about form. We can say a lot of things that are alike. Marble, this heterosexual couple, the carving, the process itself, right? So medium and very dry and objective. It's what we call objective critiquing. Okay. You remove your emotions from it. But they look different on purpose. That form is changed on purpose because the meaning doesn't need to be represented in any other way than what the artist is trying to give us, right? So Rodin's work is trying to tell us about the feelings of love between the heterosexual couple that we have here. Well, Brancusi, he's trying to express the idea of love, just kind of on the surface of it. So there's a sensuousness, and then there's this kind of I wouldn't say distance, but something that it seems to be a little bit more removed, okay, about just the idea without it being so specific through these two works. So the content can change. And let's take a moment to look at Georgia O'Keeffe's work. Georgia O'Keeffe was a pioneer for women artists everywhere, especially here in the United States. She was one of those very strong, independent women. She taught at West Texas A&M and Canyon, Texas, and I was fortunate enough. I went to school there for a year before I transitioned to Texas Tech, and um, it kind of is interesting to know that she was viewed um, so harshly in her work when she's one of the most beloved artists of the day. But her history, again, she was very strong-willed. She played poker. She smoked cigars. And in higher education at the time for art, it was mainly a man's field, men taught in higher ed. Very few women were teachers and professors. They were okay for high school and below, but not for college. And here she was, right there teaching. And she had these kind of masculine traits about her. So when her artworks were presented, sometimes they were misinterpreted. And you can find it uh, in older books. We don't see it published so much anymore because we know better. But some people were saying that her artworks were related to feminine anatomy. And but she never stated any of that in her artist statements ever. She says, I'll paint what I see, what the flower is to me, but I will paint it big. And they will be surprised into taking time to look at it. I'm sorry, I don't see anything in there that mentions uh, vaginas, vulva. I don't see any of that, right? So it was interesting though that you had serious art critics, male art critics writing that, okay, yeah, her work is recognizable. It's taking on da 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 da, because they thought she's kind of like one of the guys. So it was okay. They could do that. That's kind of sad, isn't it? But that was the age. So she really did kind of set the foreground, for women empowerment in the field of art and also teaching in higher education. If you ever get a chance to research her, I recommend y'all do because it's absolutely amazing, some of the things that she contributed to the art world. But it might surprise you to know that she was not homosexual. She was actually married to Alfred Stieglitz. She married him in 1924. And she actually met him because Stieglitz was instrumental in being the first to make photography viewed as art, that it had the potential to be artistically a field. And she saw her painting in the window of his gallery there in New York, and she went in. She was kind of upset that, she didn't know who this person was who owned her painting, and they met and they fell in love and they got married, and they were a pretty powerful couple in uh, abstraction, and Stieglitz was surrealism and photography. Now that leads us to iconography. Um, the misinterpretation of art happens all the time. We just saw it with Georgia O'Keeffe, right? And again, we can't help but pull in what our knowledge is and project it onto to what we see to derive a meaning. That's a very natural thing that we do. So iconography oftentimes is related to the context on which the art was created. I'm so sorry. I got something in the back of my throat, but iconography is the study and description of symbols. Okay. It it can be viewed one way today that's totally misinterpreted than when the painting was made to begin with. Because when we look at this work right here, this is Jan van Eyck's. This is the Al Nerfini portrait. You're going to need to know this one for your test, but not until your exam 2. But we're going to revisit this one again when we start talking about painting and textures and things like that. But everything you see here has some type of meaning that would have meant something to the audience of 1434. Okay, so if we look, there's only one candle that's lit up here in the chandelier. Okay, and it's amazing Jan van Eyck, his ability to convey realism. So definitely some realism when we look at this work, right? But his textures are just, they're phenomenal, where it looks like metal and it looks like fur coat and it looks like wooden shoes and a stucco wall and a fluffy cushiony bed and it's amazing his ability to handle those types of textures with just a paintbrush and paint, right? That we buy into the realism. But the objects that are being put in here go beyond and send a meaning that's you know poetic in a sense, without the words. This acted like a contract, a marriage contract between this guy and lady that we see here, man and woman. She's wearing a green dress in a position as if she's, you know, promising that she'll be able to give him children. He's displaying his wealth. He's got his fur coat on and he's got very fair skin. He's not a hard laborer. So he's wealthy enough that he can have citrus fruits in his house on a cold day when it's out of season. And then we see little things like this, like, why are there some shoes here? And why is that dog here, right? The shoes, one pair here, one pair here. This was the message that they've already had sex, that contract between them. This protects her and her dowry, that even if she doesn't produce an heir, he can't just go divorce her for fraud or something, right? Because she's saying that, hey, I'm going to get pregnant in the future, and so there's um, the audience would see this as that message, and the fact that we've got the one candle up here. So yeah, there's sexual consummation, but there's also God's ordained the sanctuary, the union of the two, the holy union of the two. So there's a physical union and a holy union, because that candle represents the presence of God. So but when we see it today, it just looks like some, kind of effeminate, stuffy guy, and this girl looks like she's been, beaten down, with, you're a woman, you can't do anything, right? In this strange setting in this bedroom. It's like, that doesn't mean anything to us. But now maybe it does, because we're reading the iconography, and I love this little expensive dog. He also represents fidelity, that there's no cheating going on, right? That they're faithful to each other. So, iconography can give us a deeper understanding of the image and what the artist is trying to tell us. But sometimes, again, it can be misread. Now, Albrecht Dürer, The Night, Death, and the Devil is another work that you're going to need to remember for your test in the future, for your exam too. But I want to go ahead and introduce it to you now because it's one of those images like Jan van Eyck's Al Nerfini that you'll need to know probably on final exam as well. So, our use of iconography here is giving the message that you've got to stay on the straight path, stay righteous. Don't fall from doing good, because if you give in to temptation, if you do bad things, you're shedding the armor of God, and off to the side, death and the devil are waiting, and not just a physical death, but a spiritual death, right? So you may not understand what those characters all are at first, but the message is loud and clear and would have been read in 1513 of, hey, stay on the right path, because, God's love is faithful, because there's the presence of the dog too, right? But temptation, death, everything, and our mortality, right? There's our wonderful hourglass. Um, we're going to have judgment one day, right? So that's the message. So, in conclusion, exploring the definitions of art can reveal a dynamic nature, a blend of human creativity, expression that embody through various mediums. There's an understanding that the nature of art underscores it as a fundamental element of human culture, integrating emotional perspective and form. Art manifests in diverse forms, visual, performing, literary, um, that meet these unique society cultural roles, right? But key characteristics of art include creativity, expression, particularly cultural expression, and not just a personal thing, because you yourself um, are taking on what you experienced in your life, through your culture and your society. And it's shaped you as an individual, yes, but you still have that kind of influence. So it serves as a vital medium for societal reflection and interaction. And then art's societal role is multifaceted, shaped by cultural perspectives and priorities, proving its place in human society. So that's going to conclude what is art, and I guess it's good timing because I've got a cough. So go ahead and get your homework completed as soon as possible. Now you have all your content at hand, and I will be working on that other video for the next content. So thank you guys. Have a good afternoon.